All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining in person and online for the Nashville Modern Excel and Power BI User Group October edition. I'm excited that some people are here. We're still a little short on the people in person, but glad you guys came out. It's always fun to be together and network in person. If you are here in person and you want to connect to Wi-Fi, there's a guest network, and it is MSFT guest. And yeah, if you want to take a picture, that's a good way if I go too quickly. So if you go to that network, you'll see these three buttons pop up in your browser, and you want to click the blue button and then type in this password MS-event272XH, and that's how you can connect to Wi-Fi. And there's also a piece of paper that I passed out that you can use as well. So today we've got lunch, we've got pizza here in person. We're going to go through a couple of announcements, and we're going to talk about what's new in Excel and Power BI. And then Michael is going to lead us through some tips and tricks for Power BI. And I think he's got 30, and he doesn't have to do it in 30 minutes. Sekou did it in 30 minutes last few months ago. So we're not going to hold him to that. But I always learn something when people do a tips and tricks. So I'm excited to hear what Michael's got for us. And then as far as announcements go, Daniel Glenn, who has come to this group before and been a speaker, he's the organizer of the Nashville M365 user group. That's Microsoft. It's a broad Power Platform, SharePoint user group, Office 365. And they have a meeting this month that has some Microsoft MVPs coming. One of them is a Power BI MVP, and I'm drawing a blank on his name, but he's from Canada. He's the tygraph guy. Does anybody remember his name? Man, I should have written it down. But he's a knowledgeable guy, and they're gonna talk about the conference that Microsoft just had, talk about a recap of the new things that came out. So that'd be a good thing to go through. There's also some people on the Power App side that are, Daniel Christian is another speaker. So they've got some good MVPs showing up at this event. And I'll put a link in the chat to that meetup page in a bit. What's that? I think it's online, but it's the Nashville group. So, but I'll send the link, and it's got the details about when it is. And then we have our back catalog since COVID of our meetings. So you can check that out and check the topics that we've had on our YouTube channel. And then we have an upcoming meeting scheduled on the 17th, but we don't have a speaker yet, but we're working on that. And we'll get that posted. And so you'll see the meeting invite when that comes out. We've had some ideas for topics. So the Power BI data marts, if anybody would like to do a session on that. There's a lot of new Power BI actions in Power Automate. I think it would be cool to do for somebody to do a session on the things you can do with Power BI reports and data with Power Automate. There's an infinite number, so it'd be cool to somebody do like a cookbook of sorts of things you could do. And then I think it'd be cool for someone to do an AI visual, that going over the Power BI AI visuals. We've had someone do that before, but I think there's been smart narratives since then. So it'd be cool to see an updated version plus talk about smart narratives. And there's so many things, but that's just a couple thoughts if that stirs up anybody, any ideas for anybody that might want to speak. And it doesn't have to be next month. It could be in the future. Just let us know. And then we usually have a slide for job opportunities. So a lot of people come to this group looking for a job, or you might have openings at your company. So we just wanted to give this chance for anybody here to, you're welcome to tell us about yourself if you're looking. And then if you're online in the chat, if you just want to have a job or you want to say anything in there, you're welcome to. So no takers, but feel free to mention that in the chat anytime. And then what's new? So we track the new updates in Excel and Power BI Desktop and the Power BI service. So the new one for Excel is the connection to the stock data is a little bit more real time than it used to be. So now if you open up your workbook, it will refresh immediately, and then it refreshes every 5 minutes automatically. So that's the new update for Excel. And they do have it broken down by the web. So the web has the formulas tab now. So you can get to your Excel formulas when you're in Excel online. And then Power BI Desktop, I'm not going to go through this because there's not a new version yet this month, but Sekou went over this same slide last month, but I thought I would just highlight the main things that are new. So the new thing is the hierarchical axis. So if you drag more than one field onto a line chart or bar chart, it will have a different default behavior, which I think is nice. There's conditional formatting for data labels, so you can get fancy with how you call certain things out on your charts. And then there were mobile formatting options that are generally available. So if you're formatting your Power BI dashboard for a phone, you have more granular control over your formatting in that view. And again, I'm just going to point you to the blog if you want to know more, because this is something we covered last month. And then as far as the Power BI service goes, we got cross-tenant sharing of Power BI data sets. So if you're sharing with someone outside your company, not just a report, but you actually want to share the data set, they've built the security to do that and the mechanisms to do that. So the Power Query SDK, so if you're building connectors for Power BI and you're using the Power Query SDK, previously it was a clunky Visual Studio SDK, and they've come out with the first version at least, which is in Visual Studio Code, which is a nicer experience for creating those connectors. Michael, you'd be glad to know that they came out with development history in the Power BI pipeline. I don't know if you saw that, but you did a presentation on that last month and they didn't have that, but now they do. So you were commenting, there's no way to see what changed, but so now you can, just in time. And then you can also build Power BI apps for multiple audiences. So then the navigation on the side, I've had people ask, can we change that depending on who's logged in? And the answer was no. But now you can set up different navigation for different users or groups, which is nice. And then we also cover Power Apps, although we tend to focus on Power BI, but these things are pretty connected these days. So we cover what's happening there as well. So SharePoint has a new image column, and that's now supported in Power Apps for read and write. There's a new form of app called a card, and it's kind of micro app that you can put into Teams. And so they've got some new features around creating those Power App cards. They also are introducing co-authoring, which is kind of like Excel Online or Google Docs, where you can have multiple users, which I would love to see this, where you can work on an app at the same time. So previously it would lock the app for one user, but now you can see who's working on the app, and you can kind of see what they're working on your screen, which is kind of cool. And then there's a new, I don't know what you would call this feature, where they match makers in your organization. So a developer of Power Apps is called a maker instead of a developer. That's the term they're using. But this actually happened to me the other day. It popped up and said, would you like to help someone else in your organization? And I'm getting ready to go on vacation, so I said no. But I like that idea, where if you said yes, and you're in a big organization and there's a lot of people using Power Apps, the chat bot can basically pair you up with, if you're having a problem, pair you up with somebody. And I think if I said yes, it probably would have asked me my skill level and things about me, but I said no. So I didn't get to experience it. And then Power Automate. So this is the service to connect to different systems and automate different actions. And as I mentioned earlier, Power BI is part of this, where there's a lot of triggers and actions you can do with Power BI. So one of the things they've added is creating a flow with natural language. So you can say, I want a flow that starts when this email comes in and saves the attachments, and it will create the flow, which I think will be cool. And how good it is, we'll have to see. And then they also added in natural language for expressions. So if you want to say, I want to format the date like this, it would kind of create the formula for you, which is nice. Because some of those you always have to look up like what's the syntax, so it should save you some time there. And then they're also going to integrate it into Excel Online. So whatever triggers or actions you can take, there will be an Automate tab in Excel Online that will connect you right into Power Automate tasks. And then they also added where you see the run history on the flows page, you can see if it succeeds or failed. You can actually put your own custom column. So if there's data you're passing in, you can actually have it show up there. And the use case was you have the flow running a lot of time, but sometimes it runs for something important. And if it fails, then you need to fix it. So if you passed in like VIP, yes or no, you could add that as a column there. So you would know that failure actually matters and I need to go fix something. So that's what's new with the Power Platform. And so I am now going to do the switch with Michael. We're actually going to switch our computers, so I will keep talking while he comes up. But Michael has been a longtime user or user group member, and he has spoken how many times now?
This is at least the third.
At least the third, yeah. And you've been a part of the dashboard contest.
Yes.
So let's switch to you.
Thought about bringing that back.
Yeah, I think we actually talked about it last month, didn't we, Michael? About doing a dashboard contest. I'm gonna mute me if you wanna. Okay.
All right. Everybody hear me okay out there in the virtual world?
Sure can.
Actually, Will, would you mind kind of watching the chat?
Yeah.
So I don't have to keep that open. Thank you. All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for having me today. Really glad to be back in person. I guess this is our third month back. So really great to be back with those of you in the room, but glad to have you all on the Zoom as well. And glad to be back up here and sharing with you guys. You know, I love to do this and always enjoy being able to take things that I'm learning, share them with other people, be a part of this big collaborative data nerd community that we have. And as we all learn things and share, we all get better. So it's a win-win-win, really. But glad to share with you today some Power BI tips and tricks. We had a lot of fun with this a couple months ago. when Sekou shared with us. And so Will said, what do you think? You want to do some tips and tricks? I say, yeah, that sounds like a good challenge, a good fun topic. And so I've got 30 here that I've put together, and we'll see if we can get through them all. I can guarantee we're not going to do that in 30 minutes, but oh, thanks. So I guess that's like a bonus tip. Yeah, that's like a bonus tip that you can actually use your Power BI, your PBIX file as a presentation file, rather than trying to take screenshots and embed everything into a PowerPoint file. So wanted to take just a minute. Most of you on the Zoom, I think I might know, and I know a few of you here in the room, but for those of you who don't know me, I thought I'd take a minute and just introduce myself. So as Will mentioned, Michael Hewitt, I've been a long time member of this group. I think I joined somewhere around 2017, 2016, back when we were still meeting in the Cool Springs area. So however long that's been is how long I've been here. So I am a BI analyst, developer, guru. I've had lots of different titles, worn lots of different hats in the space, but almost all of the jobs have been Power BI based jobs. Currently, I'm working for Hunt Brothers Pizza, and we're starting to do some really cool things there with our Power BI environment and really growing some things. So that's been a whole lot of fun so far. You can find me online at all these different places. If you hit the website, there's not a lot of content yet, but there's more coming. And in fact, I may have 30 blog posts right here ready to go. So more to come, but that's something I'm looking to build out. And you can follow me on any of the other social channels. So I love data visualization. I like taking data, making it visual, making it pretty if we can, to try and help communicate with people, to help people see things in their data. So that's actually a chart that I made after we did a company-wide it's like self-assessment called Principles U. We got all the data, and so I thought, man, there's got to be some shapes in here, and started messing around with that. And that's our IT team right there. What everybody looks like. One of my coworkers said we needed to try and make some NFTs and sell them. So I haven't done that, but anyway, I like playing with that kind of stuff. So that's my family up there at the top right, and it's very intentional that their photo is the largest, as our CEO says a lot. That's your most important job. It's with your family. And so if it's not obvious from that picture, my wife and I are both from Cincinnati. Used to have a joke that I'd put in here that said, I'd say, like, if you don't believe I'm from Cincinnati, I'd tell you I'm a Bengals fan, but that joke doesn't hold up anymore after they went to the Super Bowl. So maybe again in 15 years, I'll lose all the good guys and that joke will work. But as a Cincinnati native, I am a big fan of Cincinnati chili. In fact, I would kind of proclaim myself as a chili connoisseur. And if I'm not working or hanging out with the family, you'll probably find me somewhere behind a drum kit. And our family is also very, very active in our church, New Song, Nashville. So we spend a lot of time serving that community as well. So that's a little bit about me. And here's a preview of what we're going to cover today. What tips we're gonna look at here over the next little while together. So I want to start out with a few things that are going to seem really simple, almost some of them actually are best practices. But as I was preparing and thinking, okay, what kind of things do I want to share? I don't want to overlap some of the things we've already done, but I started thinking a lot, what kind of questions have I gotten since I started using Power BI really when it came out around 2015? What kind of things have I shared with coworkers? What kind of questions do I get asked regularly? What kind of things have I taught customers over and over and over? And that really fueled a lot of what we see here on the list. And so, without any further ado, we'll dive in here and we'll make our way through all 30 of these if we can. So the first one is that if you want to use Power BI really at any level, you should learn Dax. And if you already know Dax, keep learning. Keep on growing your understanding of this data analysis expressions language. There's always new functions coming out, and there's always new tips and techniques that we can employ as report authors or as developers to make our Power BI reports better. So the benefits of learning Dax is that you can really leverage the full power of Power BI. There is so much that you can do with Dax besides just writing measures, formulas, and doing your calculations, as Will was just talking about a few moments ago with conditional formatting on data labels, for example. You can use Dax to help determine, what colors your data labels ought to be and things like that. So you can really do a whole lot with this language and expand what capabilities are available out of the box in Power BI. It allows you to implement custom logic in your reports, implement business rules that you have. So you're not just reliant on what standard calculations Power BI will let you do without writing Dax. And again, just all of the custom conditional formatting, all of the custom, I can keep coming back to that word custom, all the customizations that you can do because you learn Dax is really limited to your creativity. And finally, writing Dax is fun. And I think for those who have written it for any length of time, it's basically like writing little code puzzles. So if you like puzzles, you're going to have a ton of fun writing Dax. And in fact, some of the best days that I can think of, some of the most fulfilling days of work has been solving a Dax puzzle or getting things just right to where something complex gets completed, is nice and performant and accurate. And so at the bottom of the screen, I'll make this file available to everybody. I put a couple of links in here. The images are hyperlinks as well. So to a couple of spots that will help you get started. So Dax guide and the data analysis expressions reference give you a ton of documentation on the language and will help you to get started on your Dax journey. So the second thing I wanted to show you is this idea of reusing our Dax measures. So this is actually one of the first things I learned in Power BI, but I just continue to keep coming back to it anytime I'm showing Power BI to somebody. So the idea is that rather than writing one big long bit of code, that you break things down into little pieces. So that's kind of what I've done on this screen. You can see up here, this dark gray box shows a base measure, which is just very simply the sum of the sales amount in this particular model. And if you're curious, I'm using the AdventureWorks DW sample that Microsoft makes available for free. So if you want to play around with any of this, that's where I'm getting this data from. So this is just a very simple sum formula. In fact, we'll pull it up so you can see it. Very simple Dax. Okay. And so then what I've done is I've written other measures that go back and reference that base measure. So the first one, this 2020 sales amounts, we're just calculating that sales amount and then adding further filters or additional logic in there to get those numbers to be exactly what we want. And so that works its way all down through the line. So if we follow this, we get to this percentage measure. We get to this percentage measure. So the reason that you would want to consider doing something like this is that, one, it gives you lots of different measures that you can implement on your visuals. So any place somebody might be interested in seeing one of these numbers, you're ready to expose that to them. But the even cooler thing is that how many of you guys have ever had business logic that changes? Or you find that the original formula maybe you're off, or a column name changes in your database or in your data source. And so you have to update all these calculations, especially think about that, doing that in Excel. It takes forever. And then you miss one and stuff's off. But when you follow this technique in Dax, you don't have to worry about all of that. You just come back to your base measure, make a change. So I'm just going to do a little bit of simple math here to illustrate the point, and add $100 to everything. But when I do that, notice that all of the visuals on the page changed because we're all referencing back to this sales amount base measure. Everything recalculates automatically and we're good to go. So it's one change to keep track of, and it flows on downstream. So reuse your Dax measures. And kind of a sub tip on that is that if we were to just use Power BI's kind of built-in ability to create these measures for us, that's called an implicit measure. So what I mean by that is if we just took a column from one of our tables, dragged it over to this values field well, and chose sum of sales amount or count of customers or whatever we wanted to do, we're kind of limited then by whatever choices they give us. When we write an explicit Dax measure, that opens up everything we've just talked about. So it's a good habit to really get into writing those Dax measures to be able to expand the capability of what you're able to implement with Dax. And then once you do get into writing more and more Dax, one of the things that you want to do is make sure your code is readable. And there's a great tool out there called Dax Formatter that helps us with keeping our code easy to read. Imagine back to some of your Excel days for those of you who have been longtime Excel users, and just think about your formula bar and the most complex formula you've ever written. And 2 years later, you're troubleshooting that formula and you're just, oh my goodness, what was I thinking when I wrote that? Probably all of you have had that moment. A tool like this really makes it a lot easier for us to keep track of what's happening in our code. So let me find one here and we'll actually demonstrate how this works. So I'm going to jump over and use daxformatter.com and copy and paste the code, hit format. And this one didn't do a whole lot of formatting. It's not super complex, but you can see that by default, what the website did was added some spaces in, just made sure that everything in this Dax was easy to read. Now, if we had 20 lines of code, it would do all kinds of indentations and give us something that really, really is easy to read. And then from here, we can copy that code and paste it back in our formula, Dax formula bar, and we're good to go. Now, this tool is also available if you like the external tools in Power BI, like Dax Studio, Tabular Editor. You can also do formatting in both of those tools directly. Both of them work fantastic. I've used both, and it's a great way to keep your code readable, and especially if you're working on a team of developers. I know your coworkers are going to appreciate that when they can see and understand what you were trying to accomplish. With that same idea in mind, another great tip is to comment your Dax. There's 3 different ways that we can comment Dax code. We can use 2 dashes to do a single line comment. You can also use 2 slashes to do a single line comment, or we can take big chunks of code and put a slash and asterisk, open and close that, and comment out a whole bunch of our code. So it might look something like this. And when we do that, just notice our Dax turns green, so that is now a comment. There's a lot of different reasons that you can use comments in your code. One of them being that exactly what it sounds like, to add comments, to add your why, to give yourself some breadcrumbs on what you were thinking or what your intent was when you were writing the code. Because again, we work on lots of different solutions in our job and we develop lots of different things. So over time, we might forget what we were going for. Nice to have those notes, or nice to have those notes for our coworkers. It's also really useful when you are troubleshooting your code, because you can comment out sections that and step through your code using those comments to add bits and pieces of the logic to find where your issue is. I regularly use comments in Dax to help with that. So if you're not commenting your code already, I'd highly recommend implementing those Dax comments. Really easy to do and very helpful. While we're talking about Dax, probably one of the most beneficial websites that I've come across in helping me to learn Dax and to grow my understanding of Dax is daxpatterns.com. Now this is made by the same folks who bring Dax Formatter to us, Marco Russo and Alberto Ferrari. And these guys, they're also known as the Italians because there are a couple of Italian BI developers. And these guys are the kings of Dax. I'm not even sure the guys creating Dax at Microsoft know as much as Marco and Alberto do. But they've put out this website that gives us access to a lot of reusable chunks of code that include things like ranking, time intelligence calculations, cumulative totals with all kinds of thorough explanations. And basically each of these patterns then we can take, adapt to our particular business scenario, business case, and reuse them. So this is a very, very helpful website. I still reference it, and I've been writing Dax for several years, but I still go back and reference it and learn new things every time that I go to that site. So that's a great one to bookmark and have handy. And as you start writing more and more Dax, you're going to need a way to keep that code organized, be able to find all of your measures. One of the ways to do that is to create a metrics table. So you may notice as we've been looking at this model, I've already got a table created here called metrics. And all the Dax measures that I've written are all right here stored in that table. So there's lots of different ways that you can create a metrics table. I'll show you one quick way that you can do that. You really want to create one for any new model that you're working on. So one of the easiest ways to do that is from the home ribbon here in Power BI Desktop. Just hit enter data. This new create table dialog is going to come up. We really don't have to do anything other than give our table a name here at the bottom. I'm just going to call this metrics demo. When we hit load, take just a second, but we should see metrics demo pop up over here on the right hand side, right in here. Yep. So Power BI thinks that we have created a new table because that's indeed exactly what we have done. Okay, we've got one column in here. There's no data, but if I write a new measure, on this table. So, okay, now we've got a measure that lives in this metrics demo table. And I'm going to hide this column. And we have a metrics table. So when I hid that column, Power BI recognized, ooh, you've got some DAX here. You're not interested necessarily in whatever data may be in that column, but I see what you're going for here. You're looking for a place to store your metrics. So it recognizes that, bumps my table to the top of this field list, and changes the icon over to look like a calculator. So this is a great way to keep all of these metrics that you're writing, all of these DAX measures, keep them organized and in one place. And especially as you build bigger and bigger models, you'll find that really, really handy to be able to find all of those measures in one convenient place. Okay, so you can actually go then even a step further in keeping yourself organized and use display folders in your model to help organize all of your metrics. Now, again, there's a couple of different ways you can do this. You can do it right from within Power BI. You can also use Tabular Editor to organize your metrics. I'll show you real quick how we do this in Power BI. But I particularly find this helpful when I start to get double digits on my metrics. I like to keep things nice and tidy to make it easy to find, just like you might want to do if you're organizing lots of files on your desktop. So we're going to go over to the model view. And I'm going to go to our metrics table. I'm going to pick a metric. Let's just use our sales amount. Leave it in here so we can see a little better. So I've highlighted sales amount. And then you'll notice here in the properties pane, we have a display folder option. So I'm going to enter a name for my display folder. We'll just call this sales. And when we do that, now we get a new folder in our metrics table that includes the sales amount measures. So it's a great way to organize if you've got measures with specific purposes, if you've got measures that you want to group together of like types, group your time intelligence measures in one place, group your sales measures, whatever kind of needs you have, this is a great way to keep yourself organized. And while we're right here, we'll jump over to the next tip as well. One of the things that I find particularly helpful and useful in my models is to capture metadata on my columns, on my tables, and on my measures. Again, it helps to keep things organized. It helps other users have an idea of what the intent of those different objects are. And if you are, say, creating a model that lots of other report authors in your organization are going to be consuming, you can help communicate to them what different types of data live in those tables, what different types of data are in those columns, and probably most usefully, what metrics are actually calculating. So we can capture different descriptions. So on this sales amount, let me just enter a simple description here, and I'll show you how you can use this. Sum of sales amounts. So I think the title of that one is probably pretty sufficient for helping us to know what's going on there. But if I enter a description, I can add that any other custom logic or business rules that might be going on there. Now, when I hover over my sales amount measure, notice that Power BI picks up that description and exposes that. So anybody who's looking at that measure in Power BI desktop is going to see the metadata that you capture there. Yep.
So you'll expose the description in cell.
Michael asked if if when you enter this description, if you analyze in Excel, if that description is available. I don't know. But we can find out. We'll try it afterwards and see what we can find. Okay, so a couple of other places that you can capture metadata in your model. We'll jump over to the data view. I'm just going to select our customer table here. So anytime I click on a column, all of this stuff under column tools is going to show all the different bits of metadata that I can capture. So I can tell Power BI how I want to format my date columns, my number columns, all of that good stuff. I can tell them how I want to sort different columns. It's all really helpful. It can seem a bit cumbersome to try and set all of that up at one time, but once you get to the actual visualization and report authoring stage, you'll be glad you put in the work, because it actually makes creating your visuals faster, cleaner, and gives you all the formatting that either your requirements specify or the way that you kind of like to do things on your own. One other thing to consider is to for geographical data, you can actually give your give those columns of data the particular categories that they belong to. Really helps Power BI to know what it's working with. When you've got cities or states or zip codes and lat and longs in your model, Power BI then knows what to do with that data. And if you do any mapping, again, you'll be glad you did that. A couple of other things that I want to show you and highlight that relate to kind of this organization and such. Let's see if I can get this mouse to cooperate. Is to give your tables and columns friendly names. Now, this may seem really simple and really almost elementary, but it's something that I've seen over the years that tends to get overlooked. So if you have a table, say from your data warehouse called fact sales, how many of your executives who look at your report, or how many even other end users who may, other analysts, know what fact means or dimension? Not always many. And so it can tend to be a habit just to go, whatever the database named it, I'll leave those names. But if we take a little bit of time and rename our columns or rename our tables to something a bit more friendly, it can help all of us understand what that data is better. It can help these other report authors be less confused. And it also gives us much cleaner and more readable names when we're creating visualizations off those columns, okay? So I always like to rename the columns either in a SQL view if I'm pulling data out of a SQL database, or in Power Query. It's possible to rename your columns here in this data view, but I can tell you from experience, I've been burned doing it that way. I have confused both a Power BI file and an SSAS model by doing that, and caused myself a lot of extra work. If I'd have just done it in Power Query the first time, it would have been a whole lot more effective. Basically, in both cases, it got confused about how to map a column for pulling it in through Power Query to what was actually already existing in the model, and it was not good. So if you do, and I recommend you do, friendly column names and table names, go ahead and do that earlier on at your query stage. Okay. Another thing I like to do as I'm kind of building out a model is to hide the stuff in my model that's not necessary. So if you look at this particular PBIX file, Microsoft actually did a lot of that for us. And since this is a data warehouse based model, there are a lot of dimensional keys throughout the model. Those are absolutely necessary for creating the model, relating tables to one another, but they don't have any value for us in reporting, so they're automatically hidden. You can see that this customer key has a lighter column header than customer ID. That indicates that it's hidden. And if we look in our report view, just going to collapse that. By default, we don't see that customer key. So it's really easy to show and hide things. Pretty much just right click on a column anywhere, click hide, and it goes away. But we can also, as report authors, view those hidden columns. And I just right clicked and hit view hidden. And we can see here with little icons on the right hand side of the screen that there are hidden columns there. So it helps us to keep track of what's visible, what's not visible. I'll unhide this guy so we don't get ourselves confused later. Really nice and simple. So it's really helpful to hide items like those key columns. If you've got other sorting columns in your tables, to hide those as well. Anything like a harvest measure, a helper measure, or sometimes even there are measures that you create that don't really have much value in your reporting, but are necessary for whatever dynamics you have going in that model. You can hide those if you don't need people to see them. Also, if you have bridge tables, that can be a common thing if you're pulling in data from a data warehouse. Hide those as well. All right. This one is one that was probably one of the most simple ideas that someone shared with me. I wish I had come up with it, but I was talking with a VP that I had at one point, and he was asking me about a change in a Power BI file, and I said, I don't remember exactly when I made that change, but I know I made it. I know we did it. And he said, well, why don't you just keep a change log in your file? Every time you hit save, just, put a couple of notes on a tab. And I thought that's brilliant. And it made a lot of sense for us as an organization at the time. And I've kind of stuck with that practice. So almost any PBIX file, and this one is not included. I don't think I put a change log on this one yet. But almost any of them that I work on, I like to create a page, hide it, and put a change log that looks a lot like what we see here on the screen. It's an easy way for me to know when I worked on a file, or if other people are working in it, who was working in it. I put a version number in there, even if it's not something that as a company that we're really tracking. I like to have kind of a record of that, at least for myself. And then I try to keep as detailed notes as I need to about what I worked on, what I added, what I removed, what I changed, and if necessary, why I did it. So you may be in a scenario where you've got version control in your organization that allows you to keep these kind of detailed notes as you check in and check out versions. If you do, this may not be something that you need. But in the case that you don't have that, this is a fantastic way to keep track of what's going on in your Power BI files. Yes. Yep. Yeah, so in this case, this is literally just text that I'm typing in. So anytime I just make a small change, I usually just increment it as a minor version. So if I make huge changes or add, lots and lots of stuff, then I might increment a major version, but that really kind of is just up to you if you use this technique. It doesn't automatically get assigned or anything like that.
Do you correlate it with file name or?
I have done it that way, so. Yeah, I think this kind of ties along with whatever other practice that you're using or standard that you follow in the company. So, yeah. Good question. So the next thing that I recommend, and is a good tip, is to include a refresh date and time in your Power BI reports. Lots of different ways you can do this. I typically like to tuck it in the upper right-hand corner of a report page, or sometimes in the bottom right-hand corner, depending on what kind of real estate is available with that design. But this goes a long way in communicating with your end users about when that data was refreshed, and helps them to kind of get a grasp on, okay, how new is this data that I'm looking at? In the past, I've seen a lot of examples where that would be some of the first questions that people would ask. Well, how do I know that this data is new? Or how do I know that this actually reflects yesterday's sales? Or something like that. And this is a really easy way to communicate this. But for you as an analyst or as a report author, it can also help tip you off too when there might be a refresh issue that you didn't get alerted of, or something is broken behind the scenes. So this is really easy to set up. Again, there's multiple ways that you could implement this. I pretty much always do it in Power Query. So I'll show you real quick how I set it up in this file. I always create a new query. It's just a blank query, and enter a little bit of M, datetime.local now. Basically, all that function does is anytime you refresh the table, it just captures the timestamp of that moment. Okay. Create a table out of it. Follow my practice and give it a nice friendly name. Make sure the data type is set, and we're ready to rock. And it's ready to go in a file. So just a couple of quick, easy steps, and you've got it. So anytime this refresh date table is refreshed, that date will update. So you may be able to reuse scripts from your data warehouse or somewhere else that ties more closely with your data source. But that is one way that you can implement this solution pretty quick and easy of anything that you're pulling into Power BI. All right, we are moving on. So another really cool tool that's available to us in Power Query is a set of tools that I call the column profiling tools. So I'm going to open Power Query back up and show you where those are located. So in this View tab, we've got a whole bunch of data preview options. So if I jump over to a table, customer is a good one to work off of. I can turn on some different columns, or sorry, different profiling options to understand my data. Now, I pretty much always keep this column quality on, but if you're interested in knowing what distribution of data that you have in a particular column, you can turn on column distribution. Or if you want a really nice big view of your data, you can turn on this full column profile. It's going to show you all kinds of different pieces of data on your data. But it's a great way to help you understand what's going on with your data if this is a new data set to you. So you can get an idea of what kind of unique values you have. So like in this customer key, there's 1,000 values and 1,000 of them are distinct. That's good. It means our keys are actually unique. We want to see that. We can see in our states and province data that we've got 35 values and 10 of them are unique. So we've got some overlapping there, but we can get to know our data really quickly. What I like to use this for is on this column quality. I want to find errors in my data. Sometimes if we've got a nice clean data set like this, spotting errors in our data can be really tricky. Because even though we can see errors in our data, and we won't see any here, it would say error in the cell. We'd have to scan through that and look for that error individually. Takes a long time, but with this column quality, Power Query is doing all the work for us, and all we have to do is look for those errors. We can clean them up before we load our model and get surprised. Oh no, we found 90 errors in our data. So it's some great tools to help you get to know your data, to understand your data, and to really make sure it's cleaned up before you load it. All right. One more thing I want to show you in Power Query is how you can actually build your own date table. So we talk a lot in Power BI about the use of time intelligence measures, and that really being gold in Power BI, and it is. But in order to write a lot of that time intelligence, we need to have a date table. So if you're consuming data out of your data warehouse, you've probably got a date table already available to you. And you can reuse that dimension and you're good to go. But if you're, say, pulling data in from a spreadsheet or a smaller data set that doesn't already have that date table built out for you, you can do that in Power BI, Power Query very, very quickly. So all you really need is a column of dates. And again, I'll make this file available so you can see how I put together this particular column of dates to get started. And from there, we're just going to use the UI. You don't have to write any code, and you can start to build out a lot of the different date attributes that you'd want to see in your date table. So we can add the year of our column. Go back and select that date and add a couple more. So the logic is already built in here to give us month names. We can do days of the week, all kinds of different stuff, and end up with a big table full of all kinds of data attributes then that are really helpful to us in writing DAX and visualizing our data in Power BI. And all of it we get to do without having to write any code. Now we could write a little bit of M and further extend our date table, but to get started with a basic one, all you have to do is a few mouse clicks, hit load, and you're ready to rock. So if you don't have a date table available somewhere else, I very much recommend using Power Query to get you started on one. All right, so the next thing I want to show you is probably, I don't know if it's the nerdiest thing we'll look at today, but in my mind, it's probably the coolest thing we're going to look at today. So have you ever been working, say, on a file, could be a Power BI file, and you just completely mess it up? You get so off in the weeds on what you're doing. That's enough. I got to start over. I've had that happen many times. I've also had some scenarios where somebody started to build some queries in Excel, maybe get a little Power Pivot model going on, and we say, hey, it's time to upgrade this to Power BI. And we want to extend what we're doing here. So we don't necessarily want to keep everything, but we want to reuse a lot of the queries. So there's a nice handy way that you can get your queries around to different files. And this works on any place you can use Power Query. This tip will work. So I'm going to open up Excel, and I'm just going to open up, just need to open up Power Query here. And what we're actually going to do is copy and paste our queries. What's fun about this is that we can get as broad or as granular as we want to. Actually, you know what? Let me Let me just do it this way. Forgot to open this before. Oops. Yeah, that works. Okay. There we go. All right. So I've got Power Query open in Excel over here. I'm going to go back to my Power Query, Power BI. Let's say I know I want all 12 of these queries. Just going to click on my group, copy, come back over to Excel Power Query, hit paste. Now I've got all of my queries. Getting a few errors on them, so I likely have to go back and make sure my connection is good and authenticate back to the SQL server where this is all stored. But I don't have to rebuild anything, and I don't have to start completely from scratch. So like I said, this will work in any different way that you're working with Power Query. And what's kind of cool is that if you just select one table, for example, and that table is referencing another table in Power Query, it is smart enough to know, hey, wait a minute, I need both of those tables, and it'll bring them over for you. So that works between Power BI, Excel, and Visual Studio if you happen to be working with Power Query and an SSAS model. You can copy and paste between any of those three in any combination. So that one's kind of a fun one, but that's helped save me a lot of time when I've been working in different models, or sometimes I write a really cool script and I just don't want to open the advanced editor and copy the code. It's much more fun to just copy the query and bump that over. Okay, so the next one I want to show you is a way that you can actually get some dynamic text without having to write any DAX. So it used to be up until recently that anytime you wanted something in your model to change, like as far as text goes, you'd have to write a DAX formula, have a measure in your model, and apply that to the appropriate visual. But now we've got these dynamic values in a text box so that we can write like a natural language sentence or terms and get dynamic values right in our text box. So let me show you how this works, and then we'll set one up. So this text box is going to show us the customer that we select from this slicer. So let me select Aaron Allen, and now Aaron Allen's name appears. So down here at the bottom, let's actually set one up. So I've just got a regular old text box. I'm going to go to a new line, and then up here in my toolbar, I'm going to click value, and it's going to ask, how do you want to calculate this value? So we'll just do a date range, for instance. So a couple of different ways we can do this, and I want to mention that because depending on what terms you use is going to determine what kind of results that you get. So I'm going to try earliest date. That worked the last time I tried this. Now it knows we're in demo world. There it goes. Okay. So when I asked it more like a question, it said, oh, okay, I see what you're going for. July 1st, 2017. So we can name our values here. We'll do it just to keep ourselves organized. And so now in our text box, we have the earliest date. And if we look here at our filter context, 7/1/2017, that is correct. So now let's finish this up. I have one more value. And if this works like it did before, This will come back to our terms. Okay. So latest date, August 1st, 2017. Let me see if I can move that out of the way. Notice how the formatting is different though, as well. So when I did this before, it actually gave me the incorrect value, and it did there too. So notice it was showing August 1st, 2017. But if we look at our filter context, the actual latest date is June 30th, 2021. So when you're using these values, got to do a little bit of sniff testing to make sure everything's holding up. But I found if we do maximum date, boom, 6/30/21. Just name that. It's not required, but I like to do it. We can get back in and edit our values if we need to make any changes. But this can be a nice, quick, and easy way to get some dynamic values. If we change our date context here, we should, yep, we get dates that are changing. So this is a nice way if you have some simple values that you need to change throughout your reports and show to show your end users some piece of data. This is a nice, easy way you can do that. It's a little quicker than having to write some DAX, and it may work out really well for you. So that was a fun one I've kind of played around with lately. That has been handy. So the next thing I want to show you is zoom sliders. Now these are not available in every visual in Power BI, but they're available in many of the visuals, bar charts, column charts, line charts. And any place that you have a Cartesian value, like a number, a date, you can turn these zoom sliders on. And what it allows you to do then is to pick different sections of your chart to focus in on without having to change any other slicer or filter settings on your page. So for instance, we've got a big long trend here. And many requirements, oftentimes we need to show long-term data. But what if we're interested in saying, hey, what's going on here? There's a couple of spikes that look really tight there. What we can do is use these zoom sliders at the bottom of the screen and actually zoom in, and we can get really, really granular with this. I keep going. Now we're getting down to individual dates. So it's a really nice way to allow users to hone in on the data without actually having to change all the surrounding context in other visuals as well. What I really like about having it on this like sales amount measure over here is that I can keep following a best practice and keep a 0 on my y-axis, but still give people in a way to narrow that down and get to the range that they want to, or zoom all the way out and get the big picture and see where that line actually falls in relation to 0. That's been a really nice one to implement. So that's a really handy tool. You can turn that on over here in the formatting pane, just right here under zoom slider. And you do have control over if you want it on both axes, should it be available or not. So that's been really, really helpful. I've had a lot of end users who really like having that available. Okay. Next one is another kind of UX piece, but one of the most common visuals, at least that I get asked to create, is people say, hey, I want to see the data. I want to see my numbers. I want that table. I want that matrix. And anytime I'm using a matrix visual, I've always found that with end users in the past, it's been really tough for them to know how to work through the hierarchies of data in that matrix. Okay, so for those of you who have been using Power BI for a while, you know, if you hover over the matrix visual, we've got all these drill icons. For some users, that's intuitive. For some, it's not. And these plus icons came out a few years back that actually puts these little icons, very much like a pivot table in Excel, over to the left of your categories so you can drill in and drill out. So these actually get turned on, at least in my instance of Power BI, by default. That wasn't always the case. And so my tip is, if they're not on, turn them on, because you'll probably get a much better end user experience. And frankly, it really is much easier to just plus and minus into these different categories. So if it's not there, turn them on. It makes that matrix so much more useful. And along with that, show me the data. One thing that those of you who know me a little bit better will know is that I really truly am a big fan of seeing the data in charts. I think there's a lot of value to looking at data visually, but I respect when folks want to see those numbers. And there's nothing wrong with the table. There's nothing wrong with the matrix. That's a perfectly good data visualization, especially when either are built appropriately. But I always like to find a way that we can still show a chart in the context of that table. So the way I like to do that is to implement a custom tooltip. And I put one together here. If it behaves, let's turn it on. So what I've done is I built on another screen, I created a tooltip page. I told the page that I want it to be a tooltip. There we go. So right over here on the page information, I just said, use it as a tooltip. When I did that, Power BI said, all right, formatted the page for me to an appropriate size. I dropped a line chart in here with a couple of relevant pieces of data. Okay, so now I'm going to come back over here onto this matrix. I'm going to scroll over to my general, turn tooltips on, tell Power BI I want to use a report page, and then I'm going to navigate to that example that I created. When I do that, now we can actually see that tooltip with our trends in the context of whatever cell I'm hovering. So it's a way that I can give an end user access to all the numbers, but give them a way as well to see things visually. It's really nice because I've thrown some different charts up on the screen and had a couple of customers say, whoa, I've never seen that in my data before. And I've been looking at this data for a long time. So they're just used to, they came actually from a finance background, always very used to just seeing the numbers. But when they saw the lines, when they saw the different bars of what was getting represented, it showed them something different. So this is a nice handy way that you can give an end user both. All right. So another thing that I get asked all the time is, how do I get to the details? I may deliver some visuals like this. I just threw up a couple of simple ones here for us to work through, but how do I get to the details? And that's a really good question and is a need of most of our end users. Power BI sets us up for success with that very easily. So let me show you how to set that up. Got a details screen here with a bunch of different data points on it that support all of those visuals we were just looking at. So what I want to do is add drill through fields. So basically all I'm doing is telling Power BI, here's how I want to get from that summary over to these details. Now I can use different like dimensional columns. So we could use a customer name, a product ID, all different kinds of column names like that. I can use a measure, and that's where we're going to start. So I'm just going to drag my sales amount measure here. Okay. When I do that, I can come and right click any of these charts that have the sales amount measure aggregating in them. And I'm probably going to have to pause here and plug in real fast. The 2 hours of battery I had went real quick. Yeah, if you don't mind. So what that's going to allow me to do then is to be able to drill through on my data. So if I right click, I just right clicked on this Australia bar, drill through, order details. And once that loads, what we're going to see is that our region only shows us orders for the Australia region. So now our end users have the context of that detailed data right there in front of them with just a couple of clicks. Now notice that when I do that over here on my ribbon chart, I don't have that sales amount measure. So when I right click, thank you. When I right click, I don't have the option to drill through. So let me show you one more quick, let's add one more. What did I use on that? I'm gonna put this customer country region over as an additional drill through filter. Okay, so we can have multiples. Now, if I right click on a spot in this ribbon chart, I can also jump over and see the supporting details behind that summarization in the chart. And that gives users the option to get to that data. Now, in my experience, I find that right clicking on an item here in the chart doesn't always translate to somebody's natural behavior. What I mean by that is somebody doesn't always think, I want to see the details, I need to right click to drill through. So another tip is to include a drill through button. So if I come up here and insert a new button, it's a blank button. I don't think they were. So I just have a blank button here. Throw it at the bottom of the screen. I'm going to set a button action to drill through. Set the destination to order details. And notice that my button now is a gray, it's disabled. And it's telling me if you want to drill through, you got to select something. So I'll select a bar. Notice that our button changes colors. Now if I click it, we're going to get back over to our details screen and we're filtered to that northwest region that I selected. That can be a much more intuitive way to let your end users know that drill through is available and gives them a little bit of instruction as well on how to go about activating that drill through. All right, we got a couple more minutes here. So I think we're going to make it. So this is a technique using a button as a card that Reed Havens shared during the pandemic. He came and did a talk for our user group, and he almost kind of dropped this in as a little nugget during his talk, and it was like, whoa. So I finished listening to his talk and I got to playing. But if you use a lot of Power BI cards like this one, you know that you can be kind of limited in your formatting options. There's a lot of things you can do, but there's not a lot of customization even to move like this 19.7% value around within that visual, you kind of get stuck. So you can make it bigger, you can make it smaller, but you can't really justify it in any direction. But with a card or with a button, you can actually give yourself some additional formatting options should that be your requirement. So this is a button that I created, and it is basically, I'm just going to move ahead here just a little bit. Basically, I can choose different shapes. And if I go in here to the style pane, I've got all kinds of different options available to me for formatting. And so it gives me a whole bunch of options that I don't have on the regular card. Now, one thing to be aware of if you do this is that you do need to create a measure that formats your value as text. It's the only way you can get a button to display a value like this. So if you want to go that direction, that is going to be a requirement for you. There's a couple more things I want to highlight before we run out of time. Not that. Is including a username measure in your model. So these are a couple of examples of what that can look like. I like to do this when I'm implementing a model that has role-based security involved. Dropping these measures onto a page can be really helpful when I'm troubleshooting. Different folks logging in. I had a requirement actually at one time on a project where some user had like 4 different AD logins into their Microsoft account. And so we could never figure out what she was logging in with. We threw up this measure, and then we figured, oh, hey, because you're using your sales login, you're not seeing your operations data that you were expecting to see. So including one of these is really simple. And it's literally just what the title shows, username or user principal name, to get domain / username or the more formal email address. Want to make you aware that you can live connect to your Power BI data sets. So when you publish a data set to powerbi.com, you can actually connect to that data set from Power BI desktop by choosing Get Data, Power BI data sets. This one, I think, in many ways is kind of a game changer because it can help remove the temptation to copy and paste our data sets and have like 12 different copies of the same thing floating around in our environments. We can reuse those data sets over and over and over, grow them and expand them. And this is really helpful if you've got a lot of analysts or a lot of authors around your organization, and you kind of want to point everybody back to one source of truth. This is really helpful. Okay. Loading Excel files. Love to do that in Power BI, but I'm not a big fan of setting up gateways to get me back to everybody's PCs or to 100 different network locations. So a way you can get around that is to save your file on OneDrive, copy the path from the Excel info tab. Okay, when you do that, you're going to get something that looks like this. It's going to have this little question mark web equals 1 at the end. If you drop that, copy this URL into the web connector in Power Query. Power Query is smart enough to know, hey, you're connecting to an Excel file and lets you do all the normal transformations and Power Query work that you would do had you have connected with an Excel connector. But because you connected with the web, you just have to make sure you're authenticated with your Microsoft credentials, and you don't have to use the gateway to get to that Excel file. I think we're at time. So for those who need to drop off, thanks for joining, but Will says keep going, so I'm going to finish the last few. Yeah. All right. So we talked a little bit in our last tips and tricks about using DAX variables, which are super helpful. But one thing I've been enjoying lately, and actually I picked this up because of reading articles on Dax patterns, is that Dax variables don't just have to store like a single scalar value. You can actually store tables of data in a Dax variable. And so this is a look at the same, basically the same ranking measure. The first one shows how we might typically write that, where we're filtering a table of data down and then ranking the sales amount over, in this case, our customers. The second one shows the same thing, but instead breaking it down into different pieces using variables, and what that kind of looks like. So it makes the code a little bit more readable, and actually had an example not too long ago with some pretty specific and complex business logic where I shaved like 16 seconds off a measure by just breaking it down using different variables, much in this same pattern, because using the variables was so much more performant. It took something that I was like, I could never deliver this to an end user into one of those days where at the end of the day, I was like, that was a good day. That was fun. So really enjoyed learning this, and have probably been trying to use it a little too much, frankly, but it's really helpful. So with performance in mind, one of the things that is available to us in Power BI that is really helpful is this tool called the Performance Analyzer. So if we go over to View, we can turn on the Performance Analyzer here. And basically what this is going to do is it's going to, well, let's run it, and we'll let it show us what it's going to do. So if I choose to start recording, I'm just telling Power BI, keep track of what happens when I refresh my visuals. When I do that, it's looking at every visual that I have on the screen of the currently selected page, and it's telling me how many milliseconds it took to load that visual. Now these were all pretty quick. That text box loaded in like 41 milliseconds, or the image did. The text box loaded in 39 milliseconds. The slowest visual on the page was 375 milliseconds. That's pretty quick, but when you are working with lots and lots of visuals on your page, there might be one or two that's kind of a culprit. This is a way to help you kind of identify what those are, and kind of understand what's going on behind the scenes there. But one of the really cool things you can do here is that if we select one of these and drill into more detail, we can actually figure out, okay, what is Power BI doing with the DAX behind the scene to load this visual? How much of it is just the actual visual, like the actual visual pieces rendering? How long is that taking? And then what is just other, just other processing or other rendering that has to take place to get this to show up? So this one's pretty quick, but if we wanted to do a little troubleshooting, we can actually copy the query and open this up in, let me open Notepad. And we're actually going to see the DAX that Power BI was using to pull the data in for that visual. So a nice little side benefit of running your performance analyzer too is that if you're trying to learn more about DAX, you can see, well, here's how the guys on the Power BI team are using it, and kind of break this down and understand what's going on there. But this can be a great tool to help you find where issues are in your visuals, or even help you to kind of identify some spots where you might want to do a little performance tuning before you deliver a solution out to your customer. So as we're preparing to publish our reports, one thing I always like to kind of stop and think through is the header icons. So the header icons are anything that shows up like at the top of the visual, sometimes at the bottom, depending on where you have it positioned on the page. It's all these icons up here. All of these guys. And depending on the report visual that you're using, you may end up with all kinds of options that you don't necessarily need there. And if it's hidden on the text box, but any text boxes that you have these icons, any images that you have these icons. Sometimes they get in the way. So if I've got a really tight report, for instance, notice that these icons are overlapping the visual above that. Maybe we don't want to see that. We can turn those off. So if I select my visual, go over to the general format pane, I've got this header icons option. So I can either turn all of them off, or I can pick and choose what is necessary and what is not. So the tip really is for stuff like images, text boxes, to go ahead and turn a lot of those icons off. They're not really necessary. When you're hovering over that visual, you don't really need to see all of those icons. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind here is that one, when you turn them off, they still show up in Power BI Desktop. Once you publish the report, now it would stop. We would stop seeing those. But if you turn those icons off, you may limit your end user's ability to take one of these visuals and pin it to a dashboard. So test that out, make sure it's working the way you expect. But especially if you've got a tight dashboard that you're working on, a tight report with lots and lots of visuals on the page, this can help you clean it up and help your users from not getting frustrated. Like every time I hover over this thing, it covers up that number I need to see or whatever. So that's a good way to make sure you are clean and ready to go. So another thing that is really good as you're preparing to publish your report is actually do some color blindness checks on your visuals. So we know that around 9% of people have a color deficiency in their vision, but we don't always know who that is, and you can't really run around your organization and be like, hey, who's colorblind around here? That's a good way to get a meeting with HR. Sometimes you may know who folks are, and sometimes you may not know who those folks are. And while 9% doesn't sound like a big number, chances are people that you know have some sort of color deficiency, and we want to make sure the things that we're creating are relevant for them. So we can use this tool called the Cobless Color Blindness Simulator. There's lots of tools out there. This is one I've just used, so I'll show you how it works. And I'll have the link to that available here in the file. But basically what it allows you to do is upload an image of your choosing. So I just took a snapshot of one of the pages here in the report, and we can look and get an idea of what people with different color vision deficiencies see by choosing these different options. So somebody who's got a red weak protanomaly is going to see that. Like almost all of the reds are gone from our color selections now. We can toggle through these different options to make sure that there's enough contrast between our colors so that we don't end up with, some overlapping colors somewhere. A bunch of the ones in here I've kind of tested before, so most of them are okay, but there's one right there. This blue and that blue is really similar. But it just gives you a way to kind of better understand what an end user of yours may be seeing. It's tough for us who don't have that color deficiency sometimes to understand, and this tool gives us a way to understand that, to get on top of that and make sure that what we're developing, what we're producing is relevant for them and is accessible for them. So that's a great tool to check out. Okay, the last one I want to show you. It's another web-based one. It's this lineage view on powerbi.com. So how many of you guys have seen that? Okay, a couple of you have. So this actually, it's not really something that's hidden on powerbi.com, but I'll admit that for myself, I didn't discover it for a really long time. And when I did discover it, I was like, this is all I want to see. So when we're in a workspace, this is probably the view that you're used to seeing. Your reports, your data sets. If you've got a dashboard in your workspace, you can see that here. But if we turn on our lineage view, it's a great way to get a holistic look across that workspace of what's happening in the workspace. So where are my data sets or my data sources all the way to the left? And then moving towards the right, we can see what reports connect to those data sets. If we had dashboards, we'd see those off further to the right. And so just like what we see up here, we can see where multiple reports are connected to one data set. And this view, toggling over to this view, this lineage view, gives you a more holistic look at your workspace, can help you identify something like this where we do have multiple reports connected to that one data set much more quickly. And especially if you've got a lot of people authoring and publishing content out to different different workspaces, this can be really helpful for you to stay on top of that and to better understand what's happening, in the whole kind of topography of your environment. So that is the last tip that I have. Thank you guys for letting me share with you today, and I trust that you've learned something, and always welcome your feedback. So happy to connect, answer questions, or do anything like that that might be helpful to you. So thank you again, guys. Thank you.
Got a lot of terrific presentations. Great set.
So thank you. Cool.
Well, thanks everybody for joining online and in person, and we'll catch you guys next month on the 17th. Look out for a notification about when that's posted. Have a good day.